Hey, good afternoon, everyone. We got a big group here. Nice to see a bunch of y'all. Looks like it's exactly 2. I will give just a couple more minutes before I start with the formal Q&A process, just for those who are still coming on. But yeah, good to see everyone. Hope you're doing well in this unusual world and year that we live in these days. Yeah, lots of really good questions sent in, and eager to go through those with you guys and help make some sense of that. And exciting news story, really great time for those with thyroid disease and so much more chance to get better and great opportunities. So really cool thing, and jazzed to share this with you. If you don't have some water, you might want to grab some and get yourself comfortable. Can I see a thumbs up if my audio is coming through all right? Everyone hear me okay? Good, good. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, so 2:01. I'll give one final minute, and then I'll jump in because there's tons of folks coming on here still moment by moment. And yeah, lots of questions were sent in. I went through those over the course of this last day and up to the last few minutes and put together as many as I could. I won't be able to get to every single one individually, but a lot of these were recurrent themes. And so I did really compile those to make the best use of our time. Those in the program, we are doing a live Q&A with a smaller group during that as well. And yeah, Mondays I do live events on Instagram and Facebook. You can always come on and ask detailed things. I'm happy to help out with those. So yeah. I'm watching my countdown timer here. Okay, just about. And we are recording. Yep, we got that going. Many more coming on still. Okay, well, I'm going to kick this off. And those who do come on midway through, you can access the recording afterward as well. So welcome. I'm Dr. Alan Christianson. Nice to see you guys and good to be here with you live. You know, it's a tricky time being away from people for so long. So these things, I don't know, it's not quite the same, but it's nice. It's better than not being around people at all. So yeah, good to see you and thank you for the feedback. Lots of comments just of thanks about the Invisible Iodine Docuseries. So yeah, I'm glad that was helpful. It's been an amazing story. You know, I put together a new thyroid book, and I don't know, I realized that when the publishers asked for that, they didn't really so much have ideas about there being something radically new or different. They knew that I've done this for a long time and wanted me to put together another book for that. And I was happy to do so. And the thought was, yeah, I know what I'd want to say, but then I realized I could do it well just by doing it off the cuff, but I could do it so much better if I put some time and just dug real deep and just challenged my own assumptions and saw if there was new data that's come out in the recent past. And so I took about a full year and just did really full-time research on the topic and was just amazed how much more data has come out. So that's why we're here, and that's what launched the real Invisible Iodine Docuseries, and that became the big focus of the book. And I got feedback from many who had seen that there was just a lot of questions that it became unclear. And of course, many of these are in the program, but a lot were recurrent. I wanted to help out as much as I could, so here we are. And I'm going to put a couple links up. I will mention the program. There's 2 versions of that. This is the Personalized Thyroid Program. I'm going to drop that in our Zoom chat box here. So you should see a chat thing pop up momentarily, and I'm going to share this here with all. Okay, and getting it in, there it goes. All right, so that's in the chat, and I'll get my notes back up. There we go. Yeah, so the idea was I wanted the docuseries just to get the word out that this is a big deal, that thyroid disease is more reversible than anyone thought, and that there's been a real new element to the story about iodine. We've known forever that we need some iodine. Excuse me, I just had an afternoon snack. Some of it's not where it should be. A couple of little pieces of almonds there, my apologies. So we've known forever that we need iodine for good thyroid function, and we've known forever that way too much is a bad thing. But the new side of that is that there's this opportunity to reverse thyroid disease by being in this specific iodine window. That's the part we didn't know before. Many asked about the idea that some doctors talk about high dose iodine. That part wasn't the part that changed. That data, we'll talk more about that. But the part that's new is the fact that if you're in a targeted window, which is often a lower window than many are in, that thyroid disease is reversible. So the question that came up the most about this was, there was this docuseries, there's a book coming out, there's a program, there's the doctors, the clinical care. So do I need some of these things? If so, which ones? And super simple. If you have existing thyroid disease, you're on treatment, and you want to see some symptoms reverse, you want to see your thyroid function improve, the program's a good fit. If your function is stable, you've got no symptoms, your gland is getting better, you're not concerned about it changing, wouldn't be necessary for you. If you feel you're at risk for thyroid disease, a lot of the things from the docuseries might be enough to cut your chance of having it develop. So you might need even nothing more than that to just be more preventive. But yeah, if you've got it and you've got some stubborn symptoms you want to see get better, if you want your thyroid to kick in, the program's really good for you. Now, clinical care is if you are on medications and you could use a prescriber that shares these goals. You'd like to have someone who wants to have you on natural treatment and wants to work you towards not needing as much or perhaps no treatment. That's what my docs are good at. They can collaborate well with the diet, and their goal is to have your body work as well as it can by itself. So if that's the case, if those are big goals and concerns, then you'd want the version with the clinical care. So pretty straightforward stuff. And I'm gonna start diving into some of your questions here. And I'm going to look through the ones that were bundled, and if there's times to get to some individual ones, I'll do that as well. I tried to make some notes on just first names of those who asked particular ones. I didn't get every one here, but I got a lot of them. So yeah, thank you for that. So one question that came up a lot was, how much iodine is in this food? You know, I saw salmon quite a bit, or how much iodine was in that food? And many had mentioned things along the lines of, you know, I look at food labels, I look at food databases online, and I never see the iodine there. You're right. It's been a real enigma. And that was part of the process for me as well, is that I had to work really hard to make a database because it doesn't really exist. So I worked with the USDA, and I worked with a lot of national agencies around the globe to put together a pretty comprehensive database. Now, it's not something that's so much just a simple list, because the foods don't always have the same amount of iodine. They've got ranges, they've got averages, the portion sizes vary. So we've got a calculator that we're going to put into the program that'll let you enter in any of about 580 foods and put in an amount and get a sense on how much iodine is typical, what are the ranges, the lows, the highs. And that's important because there's some foods to where the amounts are rather predictable, and other foods to where they're just all over the place, where you just never know from one batch to the next. I think I mentioned the docuseries that white bread, for example, you might have a slice of bread from the store, even like whole grain bread, even organic whole grain bread, and there might be 30 micrograms of iodine, or there might be 1,100 micrograms of iodine. So there is a database we put together in the program, but it takes a little education, a little training to access that and to get to it. So yeah, that's in that process. There weren't a lot of just simple answers to the questions about how much is in a certain food, because it varies per samples and the foods are quite a bit different. There is a new database coming out from the USDA, hopefully in this year or so. And if there is, I'll certainly be linking to that and also incorporating that into our databases. And it's funny, if you Google search iodine content in certain foods, you'll find the same like 6 or 12 lists of foods on every website that has one. And if you go to databases like nutrientdata.com or, you know, like the food trackers like myfitnesspal.com, they are silent on iodine. They tell you nothing about that. As important as it is, it's been a real enigma. Someone is asking too about just the new book, if they can get that yet. Jamie, Jan, Diane, a few others asked about that. So the book is up on Amazon for pre-order, and it's the Thyroid Reset Diet. It will be published in this coming January, but it is available right now for pre-order. It's it's a slow process to get a book out. I wish it was faster, but yeah, still finalizing some elements of that. So one question that I got a few versions of, and this was one specific way it came in was Kathy A-E-Y, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but several asked something along these lines, basically saying, my TSH is low, but my free T3 and free T4 are also low. Why is that? My levels don't seem to fit. And the general idea is that how your thyroid labs reflect your thyroid levels, and what does a TSH mean compared to the other markers. And generalization, the TSH is showing how much total load of thyroid hormone is in the body. So your T3, your T4, to a small extent your T2, they collectively contribute to making your TSH go higher or lower. And that's pretty independent of whether you're making your own or you're taking it in a pill. So low TSH, you've got more, high TSH, you've got less. Now you would think that the free T3 and free T4 would be saying the same thing, but they're not. They're not saying the same thing at all. What they're really saying is how those hormones are being circulated in your body, how you're eliminating them, and how you're converting them. So it can seem really intuitive that if your TSH, for example, if you were like what Kathy was asking about, if her TSH was low, that by itself would suggest there's too much hormone. She would have thought her free hormones would then be on the high side of the range, but hers were on the low. So because your body works so hard to keep thyroid hormone levels steady, you can often see things that wouldn't make sense taken at face value. In a case like hers, it's common that when there's too much, your body gets rid of it faster and you fight it. And in those cases, you can see the free hormone levels look low, and you can even have symptoms of low thyroid when you're getting too much thyroid. So part of that topic, that's going to be a deep discussion in week 4 of the Personalized Thyroid Program. And this is a cool step of personalization in that during that week, you'll be putting in your lab data and you'll be given training based upon a lot of your particulars. So I basically made the training in advance for a lot of different combinations of patterns that might show up, and you get the right ones that make sense for you. So yeah, you'll be learning more about that. But as a general idea, the TSH and the free hormones don't say the same thing at all. And that's why they can often be conflicting. Now, if someone is at the extremes to enough of a degree, they will start to make sense. They will start to fit up. So if someone had no thyroid hormone, this actually tragically does happen, rarely, but it happens. Some people have had their glands removed and they're not given replacement medication. And yes, their TSH goes up, like in the hundreds, many hundreds range. And after 8 weeks or more, their free hormones drop below range. So it all fits then. And the same thing on the other side, if someone gets too much hormone, eventually, first thing that happens is the TSH goes low. And for a while, the free hormones, they might be low too, because the body's getting rid of them. But then the body can't get rid of them. And finally, they start to build up as well. And then we see them get high at the last few stages. But between those, they don't really fit at all. And yeah, that's how it plays out. So more depth on that too in the personalization of the program. Now, the other big question that came up a lot was, how come I hear that I need less iodine? I'm learning now about there being too much and how less of it can be helpful. A lot of doctors say that I need more iodine, that we get too little of that. Let me get some names here. So Tim, Jan, Alicia, Diane, Tamara, Frederick. Let me expand on my window. Betsy, Ellen, Tricia, Kalisha, a few others asked a question along this line. This is a really popular one. And this is a great question. And I just wrote a crazy, crazy detailed answer to this, not even thinking about it coming up for here. So I'll make sure you guys hear about this post when it comes out. The video was like 90 minutes long, so it was like super, super detailed. But basically, there was a gynecologist in about 2002 who had seen the papers about iodine's effect on fibrocystic breast disease. And that question got answered a bit too. Like, what if iodine helped me before for fibrocystic breast disease, or don't I need iodine to help prevent against breast disease like breast cancers? That'll all kind of fit into this particular answer. So yeah, this gynecologist had seen those papers, and they were real studies. They were valid studies. Women were taking about 5 milligrams of iodine, and about 60% had decreased pain symptoms for fibrocystic breast, totally real. And He thought then, he speculated that these women must have gotten better because they were iodine deficient. And there must have been some way that iodine deficiency caused fibrocystic breast disease, and that the amount of iodine that they needed must have been a lot higher than people thought. You know, the RDA for adult women is 150 micrograms total for those that don't have thyroid disease and aren't on thyroid medication. And he speculated that maybe they need, you know, like 14,000, 25,000 micrograms, so hundreds of times more. And the basic thing is that there are a lot of times in which a nutrient can do something as a nutrient and do something else almost as a drug. So like iodine, for example, we need some to make thyroid hormones. It's critical for that purpose. But iodine, it's kind of like bleach in that it's also an antiseptic. You know, iodine and chlorine are similar molecules, and chlorine bleach kills a lot of pathogens. And so does iodine when it's done topically at those kinds of concentrations. So I'm looking outside, and if I were goofing around in my yard and I got a thorn in my arm and that got infected, you know, it's possible that putting iodine on that infected spot could help the infection, right? But that wouldn't mean that the infection was caused by an iodine deficiency, would it? No, that was the mindset that he used going into this. He thought that because iodine helped with fibrocystic breast disease, that fibrocystic breast disease must be an iodine deficiency. And since then, we've learned that iodine acts as a diuretic in some parts of the body, including the breast tissue and the prostate. So it causes less fluid to build up. And that's more of a pharmacologic, more of a drug-like effect. It doesn't mean the body needs iodine there as a nutrient. It just happens to push water out of those cells. And then with breast cancer, this is a bizarre thing too. So the reasoning that he then speculated was that iodine had further benefit for breast health. And he thought about the Japanese women and how many of them have higher intakes of iodine, a lot of seaweed and seafood in their diets, and they generally have lower rates of breast cancer. So he then speculated the next step, saying, oh, wow, iodine must protect them against breast cancer. Well, that idea has gone around quite a bit too, and it even caught the attention of some researchers. And so what they did is they took a large group of Japanese women and checked their urinary iodine levels. And they compared how the levels were in Japanese women that had breast cancer to a similar group of Japanese women that did not have breast cancer. And it turned out to be the case. It was the exact opposite of what was expected. So the women that had the highest iodine levels were the ones that had breast cancer. And those that had the lowest iodine levels had the lowest risk for breast cancer. And that was done in about 2007. Since then, that work has been confirmed in other parts of the world. And there's even been talk about using urinary iodine as a screening tool for breast cancer because there's that strong of a correlation. So yeah, so there's no real benefit in those ways. So the idea that this gynecologist had was taken, and he wrote some papers about that. Dr. David Brownstein was an early collaborator of his. Kind of a bizarre thing, but I was too. I spoke to him in first, probably about 2007. I was doing some initial work on the Complete Idiot's Guide to Thyroid Disease. And I've been exposed to his work, and I found it intriguing, and I almost wanted to believe it. It would have been such a cool thing if all you had to do is take a relatively cheap mineral and you could reverse thyroid disease. You could help all these people that were suffering. I wanted to believe that, you know, that would have been awesome. I would have been totally happy with that. But the more I got into his work, the more I saw that the references were all just references to his own work, or references to things from back in the 30s, or references that didn't say what he said they said. And so I wanted to talk to him and give him a chance. I said, look, what am I missing? You know, help me out. I see a lot of data about iodine that doesn't fit with what you're saying. And I'd love to believe what you're saying, but help me along. And so we had a lot of conversations. Super nice guy. You know, he meant well. He's passed on since then, but gracious man, sent me all the things he had written. But it just didn't line up with all the data we have on thyroid disease. So there have been a group of doctors that have taken that, and you know, most of them haven't been very active with those ideas much longer, with the exception of Dr. Brownstein. One of you asked about Jay Davidson. Lynn Farrow was mentioned. I have seen Lynn Farrow's book. It was really, and she even attributes her work to Brownstein and the gynecologist, Dr. Abraham. She's not saying it was anything unique she made. I did look at Jay Davidson's work because someone asked about that, and he does attribute it to Brownstein, but he's not saying anything different. So kind of they all go in that same bucket. And someone asked about this being a pendulum swing, and it wasn't so much a pendulum swing, it was more so that we've had about a century of learning about iodine. And in these last several years, we've learned that, yeah, less iodine can reverse thyroid disease. And about in the early 2000s, Dr. Abraham came out with his ideas, and they started spreading around from him to Brownstein and others. But yeah, they just never really lined up with what we know about thyroid disease. And the question too is, how come some have had benefits by those approaches? Well, their approaches are pretty comprehensive, and in general, they're doing a lot of things that are often helpful, including making sure someone has enough selenium, doing natural thyroid replacement, tracking other hormone levels, correcting cortisol. They're doing a ton of good stuff. And it's really possible you can have, I don't know, if you've got 10 guys rowing the boat, maybe 8 are rowing really hard in the right direction and 2 are not, you still might make progress. So yeah, I have no doubt that people could improve on those comprehensive protocols, but many clinical trials have showed that just doing the high iodine part is counterproductive. And after Abrams' work came out, we started seeing more and more clinical trials about low iodine reversing thyroid disease. And here's how they were inspired. So when someone gets an iodine uptake scan done, they're given radioactive iodine so that you can make a picture of where their thyroid is, how big it is, how active those cells are, and to see if there's thyroid cells or thyroid cancer elsewhere in the body. To make that work, it's more effective if the person goes into it when their body is hungry for iodine, when their thyroid really sucks in the iodine. So they've been put on diets that are done for 1 to 2 weeks that are quite low in iodine. Now, the observation that more doctors were having is that people on these low iodine diets were spontaneously getting better from their thyroid disease. They were seeing that their symptoms were resolving and they didn't need to go through further testing or treatment. And so that prompted clinical trials in which people that had Hashimoto's, hypothyroidism that was not clearly Hashimoto's, and subclinical hypothyroidism, in which they were put on diets that had a targeted amount of iodine. And nothing else was done. And between the studies were different and the timeframes were different, but typically, 60 to 80% of people would be completely cured of thyroid disease within 4 to 8 weeks. And all they did was get into the right range of iodine. And a lot of them had pretty severe versions of thyroid disease going into it, and they were not on treatment. So that's what created the real excitement and the new opportunity. We thought in the past that once you had thyroid disease, you were stuck with it. And now we've come to learn that it's not so much a state as it is a process. And the amount of iodine that it takes to start the disease is not large, but the amount of iodine it takes to maintain the process is even smaller. Yet there's a low enough amount that if you get to the right range, you can reverse that. You can actually get rid of that excess iodine and let your immune system stop the whole attack. And we now know that thyroid cells have a much better chance of healing than we ever thought in the past. And yeah, so again, if someone feels they're at risk, or if their symptoms are rather minuscule, just really thinking about the big iodine outliers, avoiding those might be all you need to do. But if you've had thyroid disease, if you're struggling with it, the real logistics of how to implement this whole thing and to do the protocol per the clinical trials, that's what the personalized program is all about. So what else about the iodine controversy? I'm just seeing my notes here to see if I'd missed much on that. Yeah, that's a basic overview. I wrote something that's probably more detailed than anyone would ever want to know about, and that's coming out really soon. I'll make sure you guys get informed about that. But I have written about this thing in the past, this whole iodine controversy, and I wanted to make something just comprehensive. So any more points of confusion or clarity, I can just point to that blog or video, and it's all there. So that's coming out really soon. One that I got too several times, Lolanda asked about this, as did a few others. Joe asked about this. It was about the effects of topical iodine. And that was something that I guess I was dimly aware of before writing this last book, but I was surprised how big of a deal that is and how common that is in cosmetics. So, for example, they've shown that healthcare workers that used hand sanitizers prior to, I think it was 2017, the vast majority of hand sanitizers had iodine as an antiseptic. It's a good antiseptic. It's very effective. But they showed that hospital workers who were using this stuff as often as they were supposed to, their iodine levels were completely unsafe, and they were getting higher rates of thyroid disease from their exposure. So they pulled that out of those topicals. Someone specifically wrote a question about how she was given a lot of topical povidone-iodine before a procedure, and it seemed like her thyroid function changed afterwards. That totally can happen. There have been studies done on that too, just like that. So yes. And now, thankfully, they found more and more topical antiseptics that are iodine free, and it's less cases in which the povidone gets used. It's mostly gone by the wayside. Kind of along these lines, Joe had an awesome question that I've not heard before, but Joe was talking about swimming in the ocean and going to Mexico. And I'm sorry, Joe, I can't remember his wife or girlfriend, my apologies, but spending time with a loved one in Mexico, and if the ocean iodine be a problem, totally fair question. So the amount of iodine in the ocean, it's really where iodine comes from, but the concentration in the seawater is about 2 micrograms per liter. And we're not in contact with any particular mass of water for any length of time. We're moving, and the water's moving around us. So thankfully, you wouldn't get significant exposure from the ocean. I didn't have this in my notes, but they have shown, believe it or not, that in coastal areas, people that don't consume dietary iodine are less apt to be deficient because we can breathe some in. So I've never heard any data arguing that you could be in danger of getting too much by the airborne levels of iodine, but people can get enough in to keep them from getting deficient. So yeah, our bodies are really efficient at making use of that stuff. We can even breathe it from ocean air. Next one that I got really commonly, I'm scrolling down here. This was one about, how to wean off thyroid medications. Let me get this expand a little more. Jay and Kathy. Also, we saw Glenn ask about this, that levels that they had basically, the common version of the question was they had started doing some iodine restriction and their thyroid levels were changing and they weren't quite sure what to do about that. And that's an awesome question. And this is something that for those who are on thyroid medications, it's a total win to have your thyroid work better, but it needs to be guided. It's got to be adjusted gently. The pitfall at the extremes would be if you didn't adjust your thyroid medication and your thyroid got a lot better, you'd be getting way too much thyroid hormone. And quickly, you would either have side effects from too much, but then also when there's too much thyroid hormone, your TSH goes low and your brain quits telling your thyroid to work. So it would only recover to a point and then it would stop. It wouldn't really get all the way there. On the other hand, if someone were to stop their medications too abruptly, their body would scream for more because it would be too little all of a sudden. And that big spike in the TSH would put a demand on the thyroid that could shock it into slowing down further. So it does just take some guidance, some exacting help with that. And that's where the clinical care with the IH docs is a nice benefit. They can help. There's a certain window, and the window does vary per age, per gender, pregnancy status, cardiovascular health, things like that. But the broad window is somewhere around 0.5 to 1.9 for the TSH. So the more exacting someone can be for their best level, the more likely their thyroid can start working again. So as they're on the thyroid reset diet and as their thyroid starts to make more hormone, it takes making incremental adjustments to their medication to keep them in that sweet spot, not towards too much or not towards too little. And it's a moving target, which is it's a problem. It's a good problem. It's nice to have the gland kick in again, but it does just take making little adjustments to allow for that. But the exciting thing is we see more and more examples these days of where this plays out for people. And truth be told, over all the years of working with thyroid disease, I'd gotten really confident about helping people reverse their symptoms and feel at least as well as they did before thyroid disease came on. But I never had a strong sense about how likely it was someone would not need long-term treatment. Many did not. Many would see things get better, but it was somewhere around 20, 30%. And now we're seeing the numbers are going to end up being much higher with the benefit of the thyroid reset diet. Now that if the gland can get rid of the extra iodine, it's got more of a chance of repairing than we ever thought in the past. So super cool stuff. So that was one about weaning on medications. Certainly the program talks a lot about that. It does take some personal guidance as well. And the IH doctors thankfully are experts in that. So you've got help available for you. I had a lot of questions about iodine testing, and a lot of ones about blood tests, some about urine tests. Melinda, Michelle, Al, Christine, several others asked about things along those lines. And here's the tricky thing. So there's not a lot of good iodine tests is a short answer to that. Now, blood tests, they're only good for evaluating iodine toxicity. And by toxicity, I don't mean being above optimal. I mean like full on toxic to where it's shutting down your kidneys. You know, it's bizarre, but in those who are strong enthusiasts of giving high dose iodine, many of them have made statements like naturally occurring iodine is non-toxic, that it's completely safe. Uh, do you know one of the most common means of suicide by poisoning is? It's actually iodine overdose, and those are natural forms of iodine. There's a reason the old bottles had skull and crossbones on them. It's ridiculously toxic, and in high amounts, it's easily fatal. So yeah, that's a big deal. And the blood tests are useful for that purpose, and they're really most useful when you're looking at the side effects of a medication called amiodarone. It's a tough thing. It's a medication that's for irregular heart rhythm, and everyone knows that it's full of side effects, but there are some people to where their heart rhythm cannot be stabilized by other means, and it's better than nothing. So it's like a court of last resorts in cardiology. But many that have it get just severe catastrophic side effects, some that can last for years because the medicine takes so long to clear. So the question often comes up, how much of those side effects are from the amiodarone and how much of it is from the iodine in the amiodarone? So in those cases, someone can do an iodine blood test. And if their blood levels are at some threshold, we know it's more so the iodine. The problem though with blood iodine for thinking about iodine as a nutrient is kind of like T3 and T4, your body tries to keep it stable. So if you've got too much iodine, your blood levels won't show that until you're completely over the top toxic. And same thing, if you're low in iodine, your blood levels won't show that at all. It's really not a good tool for gauging iodine deficiency. Sometimes a lab report on a blood iodine will say low, but that's not clinically meaningful. The blood iodine is only useful for saying whether or not someone is in severe iodine toxicity. Now, there's urine tests for iodine, and I'll talk about one little exception, but in general, the urine tests are really good tools to look at the iodine status for a large number of people, like a population. So if you want to know if people that live in a certain area have iodine deficient problems, you can do urinary iodine tests on 500 or more people and get really accurate data about that group. But you can't take any one person and say, based upon these results, these are your iodine levels, because individual results vary so much. You would literally have to test yourself over 500 times to be with even 90% accuracy. It goes up and down so much. There are urine provocation tests. They're even less accurate. There are skin tests that are done. Those are not accurate. There's a urinary iodine to creatinine test. And I think it was Al, one of the people sending the questions, asked about that. So that's, this is funny. That's a valid test to see whether or not you've gotten in a helpful window for iodine. Now, the studies on people who got to that iodine window and they reversed their thyroid disease, this is not intuitive, but even the urinary iodine to creatinine tests, they weren't helpful beforehand. So people could do those tests before they went on the diet, but the tests didn't predict who would recover and who would not. It's not like only those who were high in iodine did well from the diet. That's just not how it played out. However, in those who went on the diet and did not recover in a timely fashion, the urinary iodine to creatinine test did help show if someone had some hidden iodine they weren't aware of. So yeah, if someone did attempt a targeted iodine diet, it wasn't effective, then the test can be useful to see whether or not there was some hidden source of iodine. But there's no benefit whatsoever to testing it apart from a follow-up situation. They're only good to see which big window you're in. They're just not diagnostic in general. And they're not predictive. You know, it seems intuitive that you could say, I'll take this test, and if I'm high in iodine, then maybe this approach will help me. But that's just not how the studies showed it. That it didn't really matter whether the urine level showed you were high or low. A big chunk of people would respond. But of those who didn't respond, almost all of them didn't yet get down to that low enough threshold. So that's the role. So iodine testing is something that I really just don't encourage. It doesn't change what you would do. It doesn't predict what you would do differently. In the personalized thyroid program, I do offer that as an option for people after the 5th week for those who wish to see whether or not they've gotten to that range. So yeah, if you're already on a targeted iodine program and you're curious as to whether or not you've done that successfully, then the test can be good. But other than that, it has no value in saying, are you personally getting enough, too little, or too much, unless you're on amiodarone and you're overdosing. That's the only time they're useful. So yeah, there actually is, to be totally complete, there is a blood test called thyroglobulin, not antithyroglobulin, but just thyroglobulin. And it's a pretty strong inverse relationship between it and your iodine status, only if you don't have thyroid disease. Once you've got thyroid disease, it's not helpful. So yeah, that exists, but it's not useful for those to whom it would really matter. Okay, iodine testing. You know, what I'd love to do too is see if I can't cover these and grab a few live questions. They're always so much fun to do. So I'm gonna try to do that. Many asked about goiter, and the thought was, but doesn't a goiter mean too little iodine? And don't I need more iodine if I have a goiter? Or can I prevent a goiter by consuming iodine? And Jen and Connie asked about this. A few others did too. So this one really brings up the whole paradox that is iodine. We definitely see goiter in historical areas that had endemic cretinism. So areas that were just severely iodine deficient. Like in the US, in areas around Michigan, back before salt was fortified, that happened. And as recently as many decades ago, there was over 100 countries that were categorized as being severely iodine deficient. As of the last count of 2014, there were actually 0 countries that were still categorized as severely iodine deficient. And the last time endemic goiter showed up, there was one area in Papua New Guinea in the 60s, and there was one pocket in China in the 90s. But since then, we've got no big regions. So yeah, with endemic goiter, kids get more goiter when they're extremely deficient in iodine. However, in areas that have iodine sufficiency, like the modern world, adults are more prone to get goiter when they have iodine excess. And this is counterintuitive, but it's completely true of iodine and also thyroid hormones. You know, too much is just like too little. It creates the exact same problems as too little. So because you have goiter, it doesn't mean that iodine would benefit. In fact, it can be the cause of goiter. And what happens is that when there's too much iodine, your thyroid shuts off. Your thyroid blows a fuse and it quits working. And that's how it can become hypothyroid. That's how it can enlarge and swell. If there's too little iodine, your thyroid just doesn't have the blocks to make stuff with. And so yeah, it's underactive and there are problems. But too much can give the exact same problems as too little. So yeah, there's not a risk for goiter in doing a reasonable reduction of iodine intake. There was one that Andrea and Carolyn and Karen sent in. Basically it said, should I do this personalized thyroid program if I already see an integrative health doctor? Yeah, great question. You know, it's certainly a consideration. You know, in the office visits, the docs can do a phenomenal job with helping to diagnose other conditions. This is an important quick aside, but people that have thyroid disease, you want to feel better. You want your thyroid to work. You want the fatigue to go away. 84% of the time, there's a secondary thing as well. There's a secondary condition that can cause symptoms. And no matter how perfect the thyroid levels get, you won't really feel your best unless there are the things identified and taken care of. That can be things like anemias or sleep apnea or changes in kidney function, parathyroid disease, autoimmune gastritis. There's about 15 conditions that are super common in those that have thyroid disease. And the docs do a phenomenal job helping people diagnose and really resolve those sorts of things. So that's a big part of what they do. But in terms of the personalized thyroid program, this is a massive amount of education that's guided to you and your specifics that there's honestly just not time for in the context of office calls. You know, this is really like, I think about, 15 plus hours of specific education. So it's guidance and it's also steps that are sequential. So they can really work well together. And if you are working with a doctor, you could still benefit greatly by the program. Okay, here's some specific ones about salt. A lot of questions about salt that came in. Joe asked about real salt and curious if the real salt from Utah was a safe option. The label that Joe found said that it contained 12 parts per million for iodine. Now, here's the other crazy thing about iodine. The amounts of it, the relative amounts of it are so crazy tiny. 12 parts per million, that doesn't sound like much. But remember now in iodine, its relevant dosage is micrograms, which are parts per million. So salt, we generally consume about 3 to 5 grams per day of salt. It's about a teaspoon. So a gram is 5,000 milligrams, or it's 5 million micrograms. Can you believe that? So 12 parts per million for a normal day's salt intake, 12 times 60, That's 60 micrograms of iodine. That ends up being a lot. So once you go down to that iodine level, it really adds up. You know, there was a raw material supplier for one of our protein powders, and I did an independent assay of iodine on their raw material before I used it. And the manufacturer said, oh, there's almost none there. I'm like, great, I want to know exactly how much. And the assay came back at 2 parts per million. And the manufacturer said, oh, this is great, there's almost none there. I said, hold on. So for a protein powder, you know, someone will could consume 30 to 60 grams per day quite easily. And once you run that 30, because that's 60 million micrograms times 2 parts per million, which is like, you know, 1 per microgram. So now we're talking about 120 micrograms of iodine. And I was considering whether or not a version of a whey protein could be safe for those that wanted to go low iodine. And the answer was no. The lowest ones were still about 120 micrograms per serving, but it was only 2 parts per million. I'm like, yep, we got to run all the math and put all the zeros in. And it's surprising how that really adds up. Now, another question that came up a ton of times was about the pink Himalayan salt. That one like lit up the boards. I was surprised how often that showed up. But let's see, Ginger, Mary, Benito, Beverly, several others asked about pink Himalayan salt. And the labels, this is kind of frustrating because the labels say no added iodine. And that's totally true. They're not fortifying the salt with the iodine. But the question is, how much is naturally occurring? You know, how much is there by itself? And a tricky thing with a lot of salts is that we don't always have much information to go on. So I asked there's a couple of main producers of pink Himalayan salt, and I reached out to them and I asked them for assays. And the one response that I got was, let me get this back up here, was around 0.1 grams per kilogram is what they told me. And they showed me the assays on that. And I asked them, I said, look, are you certain about the decimals and the zeros and the units on that? I mean, let's talk, let's be certain. Like, oh yeah, for sure, that's correct. I'm like, okay. So once you take that 0.1 grams per kilogram and run all the zeros in the math and the 5 grams per day for salt, you end up with way more iodine than you would get from iodized table salt. And I showed them the math. I said, look, you guys, this is what the results are. Are you sure that's correct? Like, well, this is what we got from our assay. I'm like, okay. So yeah, that was the answer. Someone did say that the manufacturer that they had given them an assay showing that it did not have any. I've not found ones like that. But also what I did see with many versions of sea salt is that it could be quite inconsistent. So perhaps some batches of pink Himalayan salt, I have no doubt that they're not all identical, but maybe there is some variation. But the drawback is, unless that were predictable, we couldn't count on that. So when there's still a risk of getting too much, it's better to avoid. And salt in general, we think a lot about sea salt and Himalayan salt. The main selling point is that you're getting other minerals. You're getting other nutrients besides just sodium and chloride. But then when you think about how much is there, I got caught up in this too some time back, like in my earlier days in natural health. I thought, how cool is that you get magnesium, you get potassium, you get selenium, you get copper, you get all these other minerals there. It just seems like it's got to be a good thing. But then you run the actual units. So like potassium, for example, there is potassium in sea salt, and your body totally needs potassium. We use somewhere between about 5,000 to 7,000 milligrams of potassium on any given day. Well, in that 5 gram serving of sea salt, there's about 1/100th of a milligram of potassium, 1/100th, and your body uses about 7,000 milligrams a day. So if you would do something like 70,000 teaspoons, it might be helpful, but you would die from the salt overdose. So yeah, they're there. There are a lot of trace minerals there, but they're not in amounts that are helpful. And just as much as there are trace minerals, there's always also toxic heavy metals. When you do see full assays on Himalayan salt and sea salt, some of them actually hide parts of the assays, but when they show the full assay, they've got mercury, they've got arsenic, they've got lead, they've got all those minerals. And by and large, they are also in small amounts, but it's a little duplicitous to say they're good because of these nutritive minerals and then ignore the bad ones. They're really, the amounts of all of them are not that important. In terms of salt and cooking, most chefs favor versions of kosher salts. It turns out iodine does have a bitter taste in the amounts used in salt, and those with more sensitive palates can pick up on that pretty well. So I've gotten to be a big fan of diamond salt. The shape of the crystals works so well for cooking and working with things really well. Okay. Moving on, several asked if is it okay to take iodine supplements if, and there's versions of that, like if you're on thyroid medications, if you're, it's a certain type like fulvic iodine, I saw that one. And really, if someone were deficient, which doesn't happen in the modern world, they'd just be better off eating some of those stable iodine food sources. It's easy to absorb. It's easy to get plenty from those foods. It's easy to get too much. But yeah, I've only seen one deficiency over all the years. That was a boy that was consuming nothing but raw vegetables, like 2 pounds of raw broccoli per day, like no other food. So it can happen, but it's not really a likely thing. And you wouldn't benefit from that. And the more prone you are to thyroid disease, the less apt you are to benefit. So the crazy thing is that, yeah, the helpful amount is like right by the harmful amount. They're just really close. So the trick is avoiding all those extra amounts that you can. Melinda, Jane, Sharon, many asked about if it's different, if iodine is different in eggs that are pasture raised or dairy that's pasture raised or free range, things along those lines, or organic sources. And that's been studied to some extent, especially in the UK and in Ireland. And one of the people who was asking about that, I think, was asking from Switzerland. And it's more stable, but it's still rather substantial. In general, organic dairy products have about half the iodine. And the difference is mostly because the cows are consuming a lot of grasses that do bind more iodine from their intestinal tracts. But there still ends up being a fair amount because it's fortified in their feed and because it's often used as on their teats as a sanitizer. So in the program and also in the book, I talk about how those dairy items are foods you can use in targeted amounts at certain stages, but it's matters being selective about which ones and what quantities. But that's the part that I'm really excited about, is that there's no food categories you've got to give up. All the food categories have safe options. And what happened is that so many people asked about paleo or gluten-free or their diets they've done, how they partially helped. A lot of those diets, they end up cutting out a lot of the extra iodine. The autoimmune paleo diets, they cut out eggs and dairy and processed bread. They often use different versions of salt. And yeah, they go low on a lot of the extra iodine. Gluten-free, you're avoiding all the iodine in those gluten-baked products. And then vegan diets cut out that from seafood, from eggs, from dairy. So, but the thing is, towards the goal of helping your thyroid function, you don't have to cut out all the food categories. It's just being selective about, in each category, what are your safe, low iodine options? And you've got a lot of great foods to work from. So those are the big recurrent questions. I had a few other individual questions that came in, and I'll come back and look at those and address those in some way. But I'm just going to watch for a raised hand. If I can get 1 or 2 live questions, I think that'd be a lot of fun. So you've got an option to raise your hand on there. And I see one up here already. I'm going to unmute you. And I've got the screen a little ways away. I'm sorry, I think it says Elman. I can't quite read the first name. The screen's a little ways away from me. I'm really sorry, but I'm going to unmute you and let's see what you got. Okay.
Hi, I'm Iman.
How did I do on your name? Is it Elman?
It's Iman.
Elena or not Elena?
Iman.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's Iman. Can you hear me?
I did unmute you, but I can't hear you just yet. Your audio must not be connected properly.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Not just yet. I'm going to lower your hand. If someone else has a question they'd like to ask, you're welcome to raise your hand. And Elman, if your audio does connect, I'll still hear that.
It seems like others can hear me.
Yeah, I can see you talking, but no audio just yet.
Oh, seems like others can hear me. So hopefully, yeah, I think so. Might be on your end.
I'm going to hit my settings real fast. My apologies, you guys. That could be totally on me. Okay, so audio settings, audio. Yeah, that was my fault. All my fault. Okay, I'm so sorry. Let's see, how about now?
No worries. Oh, so I'm Iman. Can you hear me now?
I can. Thank you for your patience.
Great. So I have a daughter who she was diagnosed with nodules when she was 7, and she also had antibodies and also like a 5.6 TSH. And
how old? You said about 7 when that happened?
She was 7 or 8. Yeah,
okay.
7, I think. And then she actually did have a urine test that was high in iodine, and nobody made the connection or anything then. So it's interesting to hear this. But she loves seaweed. The seaweed snacks that they sell at health food stores,
Yeah,
sometimes eat 2 of those a day because she loves them. And it's, we eat a healthy diet. So she doesn't want to eat
sure.
the sugary processed foods. And that's one of the snacks she loves. So I've been back and forth between limiting and allowing and limiting and allowing, but it sounds like she really needs to watch that and not eat the seaweed snacks regularly.
That could be one of the easiest changes that can make a big difference.
Yeah.
There certainly could be more to it than that, but that could be a huge factor for her. It really could.
We started saying, okay, if you're going to eat the seaweed snacks, then you need to have a few Brazil nuts for the selenium, but that doesn't always work out. And so
you're right. It's good to have the selenium there, but it doesn't always protect people against that much when they're susceptible to it. And what happens is when someone's prone to thyroid disease, their window might be like 50 for a smaller person too. It might be like 50 to 100 micrograms is all they could tolerate. And perhaps if she were selenium deficient, that might have even been narrower, like 50 to 70 micrograms. But she may have a very narrow tolerance for the iodine. And the seaweed snacks, like a regular full sheet of nori, like you'd roll sushi with, that's actually the lowest iodine for seaweed in general, but it's still a high iodine food. One sheet is between 70 and 200 micrograms. So the little ones, you often got about one sheet that's chopped up into little pieces. So it still ends up being a lot. All other versions of seaweed are just insanely high. Like they're often thousands and thousands of micrograms per serving.
So then taking a selenium supplement, is that something that for her age is something that we should consider regularly? She's got nodules, and I don't know, will this low iodine situation and getting her selenium up, iodine down, help with the nodules as well?
Well, so it can be a factor. So per her age, her TSH levels are normally higher in younger people. I don't, oh, there she is now. What's her name?
Lady.
Lady? Nice to meet you. So we had to talk about your seaweed snacks. I'm sorry, but they're not good for you. They're tasty. I like them too. They're really good snacks. But yeah, you might even try kale chips. Maybe mom can make some kale chips. Those are awesome. So I wouldn't encourage selenium supplementation, but I would encourage Brazil nuts. You can do a couple a day. So there was a big study done actually on kids and whether or not Brazil nuts could cause selenium overdose. And the short answer is it really can't. But selenium supplements, they come in many different forms of selenium, and some of them can be too much, especially for kids. But Brazil nuts, yeah, a couple a day are totally fine. It can be useful.
Other source of selenium?
There are, but past Brazil nuts, it's like almost not even relevant.
Okay, so that is the top.
Those you're good.
Okay.
Nice to see you guys.
Thank you.
I see another hand up. Let me grab at least one more here. This looks like it's from Lynn. Ask to unmute. So Lynn, I think you'll need to unmute yourself. I hit the ask to unmute button. Yeah, I hit ask to unmute.
Unmute.
There we go.
Hi.
Hey, you going? I can hear you just fine. How you doing, Lynn?
Hi, good. I'm fine. Listen, I've just been to my doctor this morning about getting my thyroid tested. And, I've struggled with thyroid for years. I've been on thyroxine since I was 22, now I'm 70. And is there any chance, one, of getting off thyroxine, and B, can you talk about reverse thyroid, and C, can you run the program again? Because I missed it. I was moving house last week and I'm devastated. I missed your whole series.
The programs, we have the program and the docuseries, I guess. And the program is still open. The docuseries is closed for the time being. Okay. These are the things that will go along with the book that comes out in January. We wanted to have people give us some feedback and experience it and see how things worked out well for them. So that'll be closed for a little bit. But in terms of can you get off thyroid medication, there's two answers, and one of which is can you feel better? And definitely, if there are symptoms, you should definitely keep pursuing modifying treatment or diagnosing other factors. You can feel better. Now, can you get off when it's been a long period of time you've been on treatment? Long as you're here live, if I don't, you mind asking, do you know the potency that you take?
100 micrograms a day.
Okay. Just eyeballing your approximate body size, your thyroid is probably not completely stopped. So there are some calculators that are in the program that help you. One of the things I do as far as a personalization step is I walk you through some questions and show you how much your thyroid is working right now and whether it's completely quit or whether it's doing a little bit or doing a lot. So
Mhm.
you're probably not completely quit. On the other hand, you look like you're a petite woman. If you told me you were taking 300 micrograms to stay stable, you wouldn't be making much of any by yourself, but you're likely making some. And so in those cases, there is a chance the gland can come back online again. And that's the exciting part.
Well, you see, my doctor in South Africa, who was a professor, told me, no way, once you've gone on thyroxine for more than a couple of months, it just quits. And I did try a couple of times, but it didn't really work. But what I want to ask you...
So just stopping it without being in a targeted window of iodine, that would not work. And there are many people to where they are put on medication as their gland is slowing down and they need treatment long term. But the new insight, which we didn't have before, is that that's more reversible than we ever thought. So yeah.
Okay. What about taking T3 if the liver isn't converting T4 properly to T3? Because I do feel much better on T3.
Yeah, I'm a fan as far as the general class, and I'll grab one more question after yours, but let me address that one. I'm a fan of thyroid, for those that need thyroid treatment, I'm a fan of having that treatment be as much like what your body would do as possible. So your thyroid produces T4, T3, and T2. There actually are a few others that are made as well, but those three are all active hormones, and they all work synergistically to control metabolism, to give you good energy, to help your hair and skin and nails grow properly. So some people have different needs in terms of their individual responses, but most patients that we treat at Integrative Health, we use natural desiccated thyroid because it's the one way to get all three of those active hormones, the T4, T3, and T2. So I would never do T3 by itself. There are some that do better on just T4 and T3. And there's a few that do better on just T4, but most people, based on a lot of data, have their best response when they get all three of the hormones the body would normally make. So yeah. Let me grab one or two more. These are a lot of fun. So this next one, top of the list, I see a number, but I don't see a name. So my apologies, but I'm going to unmute you. Let's see, if your hand is up, you might just speak. You see you waving. That's you. I see the numbers there. What's your name? Oh, you got to unmute on your end.
Okay, I'm Mary.
Mary, hey Mary, how you doing?
It's so wonderful to be able to talk to you directly. I've had multiple nodules in a goiter for a very long time, and most of the doctors just say, they don't want to watch it; they just want to take it out. I know that's not a good thing because then you never can. It's really hard to balance your levels. So I've been seeing a functional medicine doctor, and she.
Can I cut in for just 1 second and respond to that first part?
Yeah.
Sorry, but so yes, if it's all removed, you would need long-term replacement, definitely. However, when it's all removed, it's actually easier to balance your levels. It's hard to balance your levels when what you make goes up and down, but when what you make is zero and it will always be zero, it's not hard to balance it. So just wanted to throw that part in real quick. And I'm sorry, but yeah, please keep going.
Yeah, no problem. But then I started seeing a functional medicine doctor, and I went through a whole bunch of, 6-month program, and she put me on 2 drops of iodine a day, and that scared me because of what I hear you telling us that we shouldn't have, we should have less iodine. But
So Mary, was that like potassium iodide or Lugel's iodine, or?
It's called liposomal iodine, and she had me do 2 drops a day, and I stopped doing it because everything I hear is saying, reduce your iodine.
Yeah. You did the right thing. Almost all liquid versions are about 50 milligrams or 50,000 micrograms per drop. So you were getting about 400 times the safe upper limit you would have been from those.
Wow. Okay, I'm so glad I got through to you.
A couple quick thoughts for you about goiter and nodules when they're together. The iodine can be a helpful step. Also, good regulation of the TSH can be useful. And for some people, if they have higher insulin levels, then lowering that may also be helpful for the nodules. Mary, if you put in Alan Christianson and nodules, there's a super detailed paper that I wrote, but there is also some more content about nodules we've got in the program for you as well. So yeah, that's out there.
Okay. So I can tell you my TSH and plus 3 T4 is 1.88 the last time. And then T4 free is 1.0. Does that tell you anything?
I'm so sorry. I didn't quite catch what your TSH was.
TSH 1.88.
1.88. Okay. So in terms of
TSH is 1.0.
Okay. So the TSH is the biggest relevant factor for predicting nodule growth. What happens is that it's miracle grow for your thyroid. So the higher the TSH is, the more your thyroid will grow. and the more bad parts of your thyroid would grow. So like cancer cells or nodules or goiters, they're also going to grow the higher the TSH is. So what is your best TSH? There is some individualization on that, and that is another point that's personalized in the program. We help you figure out what your best one is. It's generally somewhere between that 0.5 and 1.9, but it might be on the lower end of that. And if it is, you could be a little above ideal for helping those nodules. On the other hand, there are times to where you are where you need to be. So that's, yeah, you could be off by a small amount.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Let me grab one or two more here. These are a lot of fun. Nice to hear from you guys. There's a Deborah here. Looks like Deborah Cole. I'm going to hit unmute. And let's see if Deborah pops up by our magic of Zoom.
Hi.
Hey, Deborah, you're out at the beach where you've got a fancy backdrop.
I think I have a fancy backdrop, and now I have to learn how to undo it, but that's all right. I'm
Oh,
learning.
looks cool. No reason to. How you doing?
I'm doing great. My question actually, I had started Bulletproof Coffee off and on some time back, and so I use ghee because I didn't want to use full butter. And so
Sure.
Is there any way to tell the difference or understand if enough iodine has been removed for the ghee? Have we gotten enough out, or is it still too high?
Not much data. I did see a few assays that suggested it still was there. If I can ask, what were your goals behind the butter coffee?
Actually, I've started intermittent fasting, and it's been fabulous. And so I would have a little bit of Bulletproof Coffee, but I understand that that still introduces calories as well in the morning, so it's not so good anyway. So now I just do black coffee, but I was curious if I'm using the ghee versus the grass-fed butter to cook with.
Yeah,
Same thing, the veggies just don't do it.
Yeah, not in terms of that goal.
Okay.
And just a general quick thought. Have you ever checked your ApoE genotype?
No, I don't think so.
You know, those that talked about butter coffee, thankfully they've been discussing this more and more. That and also lipoprotein A. So, for example, Bob Harper, who was one of the trainers on The Biggest Loser, he was on Rachel Ray gushing about butter coffee and the benefits of that with fasting for his training, and then he had a massive heart attack.
Yes.
And he barely survived, and he learned that he had a high lipoprotein A level. The person who started butter coffee, it wasn't Dave Asprey, it was a guy named Seth Roberts. And he's often called the founder of the quantified self movement, or although the whole biohacking thing was really his domain. And he was one of the first to gush about butter coffee. And there was a video in which he was before a group of people talking about how he would make it and how he would be mentally quicker on certain response tests or whatnot. And a man in the audience raised his hand and said, "Hey, I'm sorry, but I'm a cardiologist, and I've got to say there are some risks from that." And the cardiologist was basically laughed off. They said, "Oh, we used to think about those things. We now know better than that. That was all old data." And so yeah, Seth Roberts. I've been reading Mr. Rogers' biography right now, and I can't get his name out of my head. He was
That's funny.
Seth Roberts. Tragically, he was 52, my age, and he died about 2 months after that video was filmed of a massive heart attack and congestive heart failure. So
Okay.
yeah,
Could you
there's some
repeat
things
the
like
two-
ApoE genotypes or lipoprotein A that can predict that risk, but we can't always predict the risk.
Could you repeat those two markers that you just said?
Yeah, so lipoprotein and ApoE, they call that. And it's really the ApoE4 genotypes, the 3,4 and the 4,4. If you Google my name and butter and then ApoE, you'll see a bunch of papers on that. And the other one's lipoprotein A. And same thing, Google Alan Christianson lipoprotein A. You'll see all those things I told you in like 20 times the detail and tons of references.
That's awesome. I appreciate that, because otherwise I've been doing actually a little bit of fasting, and that's actually fabulous. I'm having great results with that. So I'll have to watch my thyroid then as I go through this, because I bet you it's going to improve, because I do take Nature Throid, just a grain a day.
Yeah,
Okay.
keep an eye on things, but yeah,
Yes.
nice to see you.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Let me grab one or two more here. Let's see. Amanda, I'm going to ask you to unmute. So that's on your end to hit the unmute button.
Hi.
Probably get one more after that. Hey, Amanda, how you doing this afternoon?
Good. I had a question. I am in my fertile years, and my husband and I are trying to grow our family. And I have subclinical low thyroid.
Mhm.
And working with a functional doctor right now, I just got through my 6th miscarriage, and she really
Wow.
thinks it's my thyroid.
Wow.
I can't figure out anything else. So I'm like, okay, let's look at this thyroid thing. And she wants me on a big dose of iodine.
Oh,
I think
geez.
like
You're kidding.
I can't remember how much. So I'm just like, I'm trying to figure out what to do. And then you go out to look at prenatals because she wants me to be on a prenatal. And I'm like, oh, all the prenatals have iodine.
Yeah.
We raise chickens, and I don't feed them any fish meal. So I do have one egg yolk a day. But other than that, I hardly touch dairy. I make my own sourdough. So I know I'm not getting a ridiculous amount, except for probably when we go out to eat, I probably get a decent amount. So I'm just like, I don't know where to start. And I've thought about buying your program. Oh, I don't know.
So a couple quick thoughts. Please work with one of our doctors one way or another. You've got subclinical hypothyroidism, you said?
Yeah.
Okay. So subclinical meaning your TSH is higher, but you've not gotten low in your T4 yet, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So that's a huge risk factor for your fertility right by itself.
Okay.
Pretty much all the fertility specialists, even those that have no interest in endocrinology, they won't even work with a woman whose TSH is above 2. They'll insist on having that being corrected first. So that's like the most
Really?
obvious thing in the world, in all honesty. Now, the second thing, I don't know if you have positive thyroid antibodies or not, but has that been tested for you?
I'm going in on Friday to get that tested.
Okay. So in most cases, the antibodies by themselves, they do certainly confirm Hashimoto's. The absence of them does not rule out Hashimoto's. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
So, however, once someone knows they have Hashimoto's, there's not a lot of value in testing the antibodies. They don't really even show whether the disease is getting better or worse by how they go up or down. But the one thing that is relevant is that if your thyroid peroxidase, your TPO, is well above 2,000, that can be a separate factor affecting your fertility. So that's one thing else to look out for. Now, in terms of iodine in pregnancy, this is something that just, I don't know, I can't speak too much about how much that just enrages me. In the medical databases, there's now reports about 3 separate children in the modern world that have been born with congenital hypothyroidism. So they're born, and honestly, they may never have a normal brain development their whole lifespan because of that. And these published papers, they mention specific iodine supplements by name. And they're the ones that are endorsed by these people who are pushing the high dose iodine. It's called iodoral. And
yeah, I've heard of it.
Huh?
I've heard of it.
Yeah, so they're mentioned by name in these papers. Women were given iodoral during pregnancy. And what happens is, I told you before about how iodine is this crazy paradox that too much is almost like too little. So when you get a big dose of iodine, your thyroid shuts off. If a baby in utero, if mom has a massive amount of iodine in her bloodstream, baby's thyroid completely shuts off. And so the baby's born with like no thyroid function and not even an active thyroid.
So that could even cause a loss.
It can cause a loss, yeah. And the last thing I just love to share with you quickly, I don't know exactly when this paper is coming out on my blog, but it's coming out sometime soon. I did a deep dive on all things iodine with pregnancy.
Great.
Because I've been saying all along how the needs are different for pregnancy. So general adult health, those that are prone to thyroid disease, is probably about like 50 to 200 micrograms. Now, the RDA for iodine during pregnancy is 290 micrograms. A lot of pregnant women can be below that. But the question is, what actually happens to pregnant women at different levels of iodine? And the biggest papers as of late show that the further they are above 250 micrograms, the more their babies have various health complications. And then the question is whether or not iodine supplements are helpful for pregnant women. And there's a group called the Cochrane Review Board. And they're kind of like, I don't know what was an example, but they're just like the most conservative, well-respected group that no one disputes. They just pour through all the research, and whatever they say is pretty much like gospel, you know? And they just did a big review on iodine supplements in pregnancy. And the conclusion they had were that multivitamins that contain iodine for pregnant women, they do raise thyroid antibodies. They do raise the mother's risk of thyroid disease. And I had no clue about this, they do worsen nausea and vomiting during pregnancy. However, they do not lower the baby's risk of having any thyroid complications. They do not improve any birth outcomes. And even preterm babies, it's not even helpful for them to receive iodine supplements. So the guidelines for iodine supplementation in pregnancy are about to completely go 180 degrees. And already 80% of OBGYNs don't recommend for them. The American Academy of Clinical Endocrinology doesn't recommend for them, nor does the American College of Gynecology. The American Thyroid Association says that in many areas of low iodine, they could be useful, but their evidence is quite weak. So right now, there's no strong even though it's still talked about, it's all changing and no one's really pushing for it for good reason. So yeah,
Wow.
you should be on treatment to control your TSH. You should have your antibodies screened for. You should sure the heck stay away from the iodine.
Thank you. That was exactly what I needed to hear. I can't believe you called my name. So thank you so much.
So glad we got to connect. Yeah, wish you
Yes.
guys all the best.
Thank you.
All right, let's see. How about one more? Again, these words are small. I think this is Eleanor. So I'm almost like reading the eye chart of the DMV or something. I'm trying to guess the E's and the V's, right? So yeah, if this is Eleanor, please unmute.
Hello.
Hello. Oh, I see you there. Did I get your name right?
You did. Perfect.
Okay, I'll get my driver
Thank
license for one more year. Thank you. How
So
you doing?
I'm doing all right. I have kind of a two-person part question. I've had thyroid disease, and now that I've heard you talk about the prenatals, I'm wondering if that is where it came in, because I was on prenatal vitamins when I was pregnant. I might have had hyperthyroidism.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't gain weight as a teenager. I mean, I was a size 0 and 103 pounds, and I ate like a teenage boy, and I couldn't gain any weight. and I drank a lot of milk, straight from the bulk tank, because I was raised in Vermont on a farm. So I don't know what that equals for iodine levels, but
It's the same, sadly, because a lot of it's the teat sanitizers.
yes, yeah, you said that. So anyways, in 2004, I had a nodule that they watched for 3 years, and unfortunately, my doctor at the time decided that he wasn't going to. He made the comment as he ultrasounded me every 6 months, year 3, that, oh, well, it's grown now. And usually at this point, I would do a fine needle biopsy. But I think that because I've watched this and the edges haven't changed and the consistency hasn't changed, I'm going to leave it alone. So that made me very uncomfortable.
How big was it?
It was over 1 millimeter.
Over 1 centimeter, perhaps?
Centimeter, sorry, yes.
Okay.
And so I said, well, when do I need to worry about it? And he said, I'll tell you when you need to worry. That was, all I needed to hear to go get a second opinion. Second opinion did a fine needle biopsy, and it came back possible follicular lesions. So they sent me to a surgeon. The surgeon looked at I'd never been told I had Hashimoto's disease at this point. The surgeon exact words were, oh, that is gross. If I did not know that was a thyroid, I would not know that was a thyroid.
Wow.
You just a glob of mush in your neck. So I was, of course, very disconcerted. I went and had the surgery done. He was only going to take out the right side, and I insisted he take out the whole thing, because the idea of anybody cutting into my neck, of course, made me want to not have to have it done a second time if he left any part of it in there. So, and the first line of the note says, due to patient's insistence, we are doing a total thyroidectomy today. He took it out. 10 days later, I go in and...
I'm so sorry. You started breaking up right there.
Nothing in the thyroid itself.
I missed what you said after 10 days later. I'm sorry.
After 10 days, I went in and had my thyroid, the stitches out.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody keeps calling.
You're breaking up.
So he said that there was cancer throughout my entire thyroid, and that the actual nodule was fine. So he was so glad that I insisted that he took it out. I had to fight for years to finally get someone to put me on, I was on levothyroxine. I'm on 150 micrograms. It took years to get anybody on, to get me on liothyronine, the Cytomel, the T3. And even still, after all these years, I still feel terrible. My energy is not.
Is that the main, would that be the main question, or what's the main question you think?
That's my main question. So can the iodine be, since I'm on 150 micrograms of levothyroxine, I'm on 10 micrograms of liothyronine twice a day. Could the iodine be the one thing that's still messing it up, making me feel
It
poorly?
can. I wouldn't assume that, but it can. And here's the relevance. So your thyroid itself, you don't have one. You know, the
No,
iodine can slow your thyroid.
And there's very little that's talked about for us who have nothing. Everybody's
Right.
talking about healing your thyroid and recommend all these things, but if you don't have a thyroid, then
So
what?
in your case, a couple thoughts. The iodine, what I was leading up to, it can be relevant because it can also promote resistance to thyroid hormone for the rest of your tissues. So your cells, your kidneys, they can also block thyroid hormone when there is too much iodine. It can be relevant in those ways. But also think about, I mentioned before, I don't know if you heard about T4, T3, and T2. It's really common the same ways that T3 can help on top of T4, that T2 can help on top of T3 and T4. So a lot of situations like that, people do better when they get all three of those. And that's natural thyroid. The other thought is the comment I made before about secondary conditions. If there were other factors present as well for the fatigue, chronic anemias, for example, something that's ridiculously common amongst those who have thyroid disease is autoimmune gastritis. They also call it thyrogastric syndrome. But basically, you cannot adequately absorb iron or certain nutrients from an autoimmune response. And this is like 30–40% of those with thyroid disease. So many are chronically low in some nutrients, and they need them every so often intravenously to keep them stable. But those are the main things I would think about. But the short answer to your question is yes, iodine can still be relevant.
Okay. I definitely will look into the autoimmune gastritis. I was diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome, constipation. My vitamin D, I've had to fight to keep that anywhere near what it needs to be. And I have to do a liquid one under my tongue. The doctor put me on the 50,000 international units of the D2. I couldn't turn it over. I went back in 3 months later and my D was exactly the same and I took it every single day.
Yeah, I would look at autoimmune gastritis for sure. So yeah, there certainly are steps you can take though.
Wonderful. Well, I'm definitely going to work on the iodine. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Nice to talk to you, Eleanor.
Thank you. You too.
Okay. I saw Lolanda. I think I'm saying it right. I saw your name earlier in the question. So let's hear what you got. Ask to unmute. So Lolanda, that's on you now.
Yes. Hi. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I sure can.
Thank you so much for this series and for taking people's questions live. So I just did a blood spot test because of the whole COVID. It's been a while since I tested. I've had Hashimoto's since my 20s. And I got the results. And right before I got the results, I had heard you say that thyroglobulin, I think I heard you say on one of your talks that was maybe the one thing that was not reliable on these blood spot.
Well, I'm sorry. It's anti-thyroglobulin is not.
Okay.
Thyroglobulin is decent.
Okay, so my thyroglobulin was high, and then the interpretation was all over the place in terms of the iodine. You know, I think they said that maybe in a normal state, elevation.
And I'm so sorry, Lolanda, you do have thyroid disease?
I do. I have.
Okay, so the thyroglobulin has no bearing on your iodine status once you have thyroid disease.
I see. Okay.
It is a marker that just shows the rate of thyroid cell death. So it does mean there's some inflammatory reaction occurring. Sometimes pressure against your thyroid, like this is funny, but I've seen women that were doing shoulder stands in yoga and they had a thyroglobulin blood test soon afterward and it was falsely elevated. So it could be as benign as that. It can be swelling for various reasons, but that should be followed up with an ultrasound.
Yeah, I know that I had a multinodular goiter for many years and I haven't had an ultrasound of late. But then, so then with the typical profile of Hashimoto's, my TSH is like 2. It's, you know, still kind of functioning. I have a almost low T4 and I have the TPO peroxidase antibodies, I should avoid the iodine then. That's the
Yes.
takeaway. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Nice to speak with you. Okay, lower hand. I'm gonna get a couple more. I keep saying one more, but I'm having fun with these. Nice to see you guys here. So Margaret, let's see. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Margaret, and let's see what you got.
Hello, Dr. Christianson, and thank you for taking my call.
My pleasure.
I have had thyroid problems for many years. My mother had thyroid problems. My daughter has thyroid problems. My niece has thyroid problems. We grew up in Ireland, in the coastal area, and I'm just wondering, how is there a congenital issue in this, or what should I say, hereditary issue in this?
There sure is, and we know that there are many genes that can be involved. With genes, there's some that are just smoking guns, and there's no one smoking gun gene, but there certainly are family tendencies. Actually, one of our doctors, he's about to be public with this in the next few days, but he has a mother and an aunt and a sister with thyroid disease, and ironically, he's just tested positive himself. So he's a thyroid specialist who now has Hashimoto's as well, and he does everything right. But the family history is probably the biggest factor in his case. Plus, men are less at risk. So yes, family history is very real, and it can be a big factor.
And what genes would these be? What should one get tested for?
There's no genes you should get tested for. So what happens is that we call these high penetrance or low penetrance genes. And these are all genes that are very low penetrance. So what that means is that if you have one particular gene in a population, you might see I'm going to make up some numbers. You might see 52 people out of 100,000 get thyroid disease. But if the gene's not there, it might be 50 people out of 100,000. And the crazy thing is that most people with the gene won't get thyroid disease. So the genes by themselves are not predictive. Like in the case of celiac disease, for easy numbers, it's about 1% of the population, but about 60% of people have a genetic risk for celiac. But they don't have it. 59% of them never get it, and it's not at all relevant for them. So yeah, so the genes there's no predictive genes.
So what can one do in this particular situation?
You must do a better job choosing your parents more carefully.
Good.
And if you figured out how to do that, let me know.
So I am, and my daughter, we're both attending a functional doctor, and he's managing it. I do have ongoing.
So I'm so sorry, I gave you a bad answer. In terms of what you can do about
okay.
your genetics, that was the answer I gave you.
Yeah.
In terms of what you and your daughter can do about your thyroid, the iodine thing is still totally relevant. And the genes, what they do is they change how much leeway you've got for iodine. So those that are genetically prone to thyroid disease, they can't tolerate iodine unless it's in a narrow window. Those that are not prone to thyroid disease, they've got more leeway. They can get by with the occasional excess or more of a deficiency.
Okay.
Yeah, so this makes the iodine thing even more specific for you and your daughter.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
My pleasure. Nice to hear from you, Margaret.
Thank
you. Okay, a couple more here. Emily, there we go. On your phone, Emily, go ahead and unmute if you can. And
hi, Dr. Christianson. Thank you so much for taking my question, and thank you so much for addressing this issue with iodine. I'm an acupuncturist, and I also have a thyroid issue. I've helped a few patients just by giving them your book, The Adrenal Reset Diet, which has helped some people with their thyroid just doing that. So that's, I guess, my question. I don't really have time to go into detail about my thyroid history because it's very complex. It started when I had exposure to Epstein-Barr and so on and so on. My TSH levels were, for the last 5 years, have always been around 5. I had goiter for a long time. That was diagnosed as not being cancerous. I read Dr. Dadis Karazian's book, I read your book, and then I also read Alexander Haskell's book, Hope for Hashimoto's. And I went off of iodine for 6 months. My TSH went from 5 to about 3.5 without doing anything else.
That's awesome.
I've never been able to find antibodies. They've never been diagnosed. My mother had Hashimoto's, but all my blood work for antibodies have been negative. So that's been kind of a mystery. But one of the key things that has helped with my healing has been resetting my adrenals. I just had my cortisol diurnal pattern redone, and now it's normal after years of being low.
Awesome.
I've never been able to tolerate thyroid medication. The levothyroxine, I'm not able to sleep. I get night sweats. I get air hunger. So anyway, I'm thinking about going to a functional medicine doctor, but I found that a lot of functional medicine doctors I've seen are just not as well educated on thyroid disease. They're, frequently recommending iodine supplements. And so why is it that people with adrenal problems have trouble with certain thyroid medications? And would you be able to address that? And that's it for my question.
Great question. Nice to hear from you. What you're describing is a very real phenomena. It's not common, but it's definitely a real thing. There are those that by their symptoms, by their blood levels, it seems like they should be good candidates for treatment, but they do not tolerate it well. They don't respond to that. And I've seen some to where if their levels really drop off, things change. But right where you are, I would not encourage you to try different versions of medication, different dosages. They would probably all end up about the same. So the adrenal health, one big piece is that the cortisol cycles control your cell permeability rhythm for thyroid hormones. Like pretty much everything in our bodies, that's also circadian, and a good cortisol balance helps to improve upon that. But the other factor that I mentioned before was about the whole tissue resistance. You probably found some of the bigger iodine outliers like the supplements, and that's awesome. But yeah, think through about the docuseries. The program might be relevant for you, but there could be some other outliers. And it takes the window that it takes to stay stable is that, roughly 50 to 200. The window that it takes to reverse thyroid disease is often like 30 to 100. So it takes being pretty low. And your thyroid can't get rid of much iodine with the exception of the iodine that goes out in thyroid hormone. And you can't make too much of that without being harmful for your body. So there's only a speck that goes out otherwise. And typically, we're getting more than we need every day, and the thyroid never gets a chance to clear that backlog. I didn't use the phrase iodine detox or thyroid detox. That would be an apt description, though. You've got to be in a special window to really get rid of that excess. But that may be a good opportunity for you still.
Okay. Thank you. I will look into that. I'm just very curious. And also I wanted to thank you for addressing the Himalayan sea salt and the assays you've looked at for iodine content for that. I've been recommending that to people with thyroid disease, and now I think I'm going to recommend just the Celtic sea salt or the other kosher salt that you were talking about.
I had a bunch of it in my kitchen too. And the Celtic, for everyone listening, to be really precise, the Celtic company, that's a brand, they have a light gray sea salt, and that's in fine and coarse ground. They've got some good assays on their website, and they can share those with you as a practitioner as well. They'd share those with you, but they've got a lot of different products, and it's just that one. All the others end up being higher or erratic, but their light gray sea salt is almost none whatsoever. So totally a good option. Oops, sorry. I think I cut you off mid-sentence there by mistake. Okay, we're good. One or two more here. We'll wrap it up pretty quick, but it looks like this is Sarah. I can't see the full name. I'm going to guess at that. So,
yeah, Sarah.
Okay, there you go.
Thanks.
How you doing, Sarah?
Good. I'm hoping that there are other people on the call that this relates to. Not officially diagnosed with hypothyroidism, but consistently low T3. Never any antibodies. TSH has always been normal. T4 has always been normal. T3,
do you know any details on your TSH? Any actual numbers?
Yeah, I can probably pull something like that up for you.
And is your T3 low normal or below range?
Below range.
Okay.
Typically. So for a couple of years, they've had me on 20 milligrams of T3, my functional medicine practitioner.
Micrograms.
Sorry, micrograms.
I'm OCD about that because people have almost died from that mistake when pharmacists have made it before.
Oh, yeah, okay, that's a bad one. And that has kept everything fine. I like to self-experiment on myself. So a few months ago, I don't know, probably 8 months ago, I decided to try moderately high iodine for my fibrocystic breast disease to see if it moved the mark, if it helped at all. And that made my TSH go way up, and my, even though I was still taking the 20 micrograms, it made it go way down. So clearly I'm sensitive to it.
Yeah.
My question is then, like, I watched your docuseries, and it's like, okay, I do use Himalayan salt, so I have that issue. I have I think 200 micrograms in my multi. One of the conditioner ingredients, it was like the number 2 ingredient on the conditioner.
Wow. Okay.
So, but I have very few options because I'm allergic to everything.
Okay.
One of
I
them
would really prioritize changing that conditioner. I ran the math. I don't think I had the math on the docuseries, but that ends up being like thousands of micrograms per day from the conditioner. It's a lot.
Well, I only do it once a week, so hopefully it's not that big of an issue. And
It's a big issue. I would make that one of your top priorities.
Well, it's probably gonna have to stay because I'm allergic to coconut, and it's the only brand I found without it.
I would really dig around for more brands. I looked at this not too long ago. I found a lot of, probably like 3/4 of the brands didn't have iodine ingredients. So I wouldn't give up on that one.
Okay. So I guess that's my question. Like, if I cut all of those ingredients out and then switch to a multi without iodine, like, what's the goal here? Is the goal here actually 0? Or, you know what I mean? I found that
great question. You can't get to 0. It's impossible to get to 0. So there's always, all foods have some. And if you're cutting out the big outliers, there's the book and the program, there's a reset phase and a maintenance phase. And the reset phase brings you to that 30 to 100 microgram level that can reverse thyroid disease. The maintenance phase is that 50 to 200 that keeps you stable afterward. So yeah, great question. The goal is not 0, not possible to get to 0, and you wouldn't really want to anyway,
yeah.
but you won't.
Okay. All right. That's mainly my question. So thank you for answering.
Yeah, awesome. Best wishes to you.
Yeah, thanks. You too.
Okay, 1 or 2 more. Again, can't read these too well. Looks like this is Elman. I don't know if that's right or not, but I'm going to hit the unmute. Emin?
Hi, Iman, it's me again.
Iman.
Sorry. I hope it's okay. I realized I looked through the list that you had on your website of foods to avoid, and there's a lot more than seaweed. I mean, dairy products and dairy products. So altogether, you would say to stop eating dairy products for my daughter with the nodules.
So pediatric care, there's a lot of relative facets to the diet that are good to consider. Honestly, I would work with a nutritionist and share some of those guidelines. If you reach out, I've got some good referrals that way for you. But yeah, there's detailed plans in the program, detailed dietary plans. They weren't written for children. So I didn't, yeah.
Yes, okay. She loves, shellfish. She loves dairy, eggs. I mean, these are like, healthy paleo-ish foods that she's eating for nutrient density, and yet they're high in iodine. And so she had a 5.6 TSH, right around the time her nodules were, and her hair was falling out. This is like 7-8-year-old girl. So
it could totally be relevant, but I would just really have her work with a nutritionist to get some specific guidance on that.
You can't wing this then.
Nope.
Okay. And as far as nodules, just figuring that out with a nutritionist, can that reduce them? And what is the timeline that is a reasonable timeline to expect to see them go away? Should we expect them to go away, to shrink? What is the ideal scenario for her?
Yeah, I'll mute and I'll get the rest of that here. So time frame for nodules changing, they don't always change from anything. Sometimes they do stay present. With kids, sometimes as kids grow, they become less relevant. But when they do go down, and they can, that might be a matter of 3 months at the soonest, but 24 months is not an uncommon time frame. They are rather slow to shift. But if her TSH gets brought back to a safe range, that they can improve for a good chunk of cases. But yeah, just email us through any of our public emails, and we can connect you with a nutritionist that can help give further guidance. Okay, Debbie, let's grab Debbie here. What you got, Debbie? And I think Debbie and Bridget, we'll call it good. I'm getting a little hoarse.
So glad to meet you.
Hey, Debbie.
I wanted to ask.
I can't hear you very well. Could you come a little closer to your microphone?
Oh, I think I had my thumb on it.
Much better.
Sorry. Is that
Much better.
Okay. About 3 years ago or so, I went to a functional medicine doctor, and they had suggested low dose naltrexone
Mhm.
for the Hashimoto's that I have. I wondered if you ever had experience or worked with that.
I have experience with it. Honestly, it's a narcotic. You know, it's a medication. There can be side effects from that, and the argument is that it may lower thyroid antibodies. There's really no data supporting that. In the 90s, there was a Facebook group called Low Dose Naltrexone for Hashimoto's, and I worked with them to do a big survey, and they surveyed a large number of their audience, and they saw really no consistent results over a group of people. So it's not the most harmful medication, but it is a narcotic, and there can be seizures as a side effect. So yeah, it's not something I really use. We really see that controlling iodine regularly, these things that I'm talking about, they work so well, so consistently that I wouldn't have cause to use a narcotic for someone. I
Okay.
prefer diet, natural solutions.
Do you use, like, I'm on Nature Throid
Uh-huh.
right now? I guess it's a low dose at 97.5. But do you use some of those natural thyroid supplements?
That's one of my favorite brands. But Nature Throid and WP Thyroid are my favorite brands of natural desiccated thyroid. Yeah. And we do
Okay.
use those. My doctors, they are prescribers, and they do take care of that part of things as well.
Okay. I have been on this for a while. I did have nodules to begin with when I first went to find a good doc that knew something about thyroid. I went to 3 endocrinologists. The first one told me to have my thyroid removed
Wow.
because I had nodules. Why bother with it?
Mm,
But anyway, I did end up every year now. I go for the ultrasounds.
good.
They did go down, it seemed like, with the low dose naltrexone. One of the nodules, the smaller one, disappeared. The larger one shrunk in size.
Nodules do change. They do come and go on their own. So that does happen.
Oh,
But there's really no data saying low dose naltrexone would have made them shrink. They probably would have done that anyway.
okay. So it's been about a year now since I had my last. Um, do they go down also with just thyroid medication per se?
Yes. And yeah, I mentioned briefly before about how TSH levels. So if someone needs to be on medication, their TSH is often too high. And if they're well treated, their TSH gets lower. And that's a huge factor controlling nodules. When the TSH is lower, the nodules are much more apt to shrink. So that's a big factor that it does affect them.
What tests do you usually recommend? Do you prescribe for somebody? Do
For
you do
what purpose?
I'm sorry.
Tests for what purpose?
Just the thyroid in general. I'm
Well,
overdue
when
to
someone's
get
first
tested.
being diagnosed, it's different than when someone's already on treatment. When someone's first being diagnosed, we want to get an ultrasound, relevant blood markers, TSH, free T4, free T3, thyroid antibodies, including thyroid stimulating immunoglobulin, and also thyroglobulin. Actually, I don't test reverse T3. I've written a lot about that, but those are the main things we look at. When someone's stable and they're on treatment, we don't have to check everything every time. It may even be if they're just doing a quick check to see if they need a slight adjustment, even just a TSH can suffice in cases like that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking for another. I haven't been to a doc in a year or so, so this is timely. I've been looking for another thyroid doc.
You know, easy thing. One of the options you've got for the personalized thyroid program includes a TSH kit and a visit with a doctor. So that's a simple way to get your foot in the door and get started. Someone mentioned before about the blood spot tests. I did one right where I am right now on video a few weeks ago to demonstrate it, and they're insanely easy. You got this little piece of paper with some circles on it, and if you ever done like a home glucometer test, a little finger thing, it's
Right.
basically just like that. You just poke your finger with a device that comes with the kit. You put a couple drops of blood in the paper and you throw it in the mail, and it's accurate. It's easy. You don't have to go to a lab draw station and be exposed to people these days, you know, so it's a simple way to do it. But that's one of the gifts included with that particular package. But yeah, easy way to get it all going.
Because for years, actually, I've been always told that my TSH is within normal range. And
well, so it's better normal than not, but it's really about optimal. And generally that's at 0.5 to 1.9, but it is personalized. The doctors also help you understand like what's your exact best window to get that within.
okay. Okay, thanks very much. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Okay, Bridget, you're last up on this. Let me mark here. asked to unmute. Okay, Bridget, it's on you.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can. How you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. Okay, so about 2 years ago when I was pregnant, the doctor noticed that I had a nodule on my thyroid, and they did do an ultrasound and a biopsy, and it's about the size of a walnut. So it's like noticeable, like a lot of times if someone just looks at me, if they know what they're looking at, it's not that big, but they can tell. But but the biopsy came back that it was just additional thyroid tissue. It wasn't, it was just excess tissue,
And you got a baby there with you?
I do. I have another
Sounds
baby.
so cute.
So,
sorry, go ahead.
And then as far as my levels for everything else with the blood work, everything else was normal range, always normal. But then I recently had another baby that you just heard. And the last month of my pregnancy, here, let me, I have that picture of it. So it was the T4, thyroxine T4 free, went down to 0.72. Wow. And so she gave me the levothyroxine, the 25 micrograms. I hope I'm saying that right, so that you're not
you're doing perfect.
So she gave me that one, and so to take daily, and said that I'd probably have to, take it ongoing even after the pregnancy.
Do you know what your TSH levels were at that time?
At that time, they were 1.4 back in November. So they took it 3 times throughout the pregnancy. The first time my TSH was it was 0.72.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second time the second time it was 1.4. When she gave me the medicine, it was 1.4. And then my T4 was 0.72. And then now I just took it since I've had the baby, and my TSH is 1.2.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess
You're still on that 25 microgram dose?
Yes. So, and I did take it. I hate the idea of having to take it, forever. And listening to what you've been saying, it's not, you don't have to take it forever if you get the right, care. So I was like, okay. So I immediately went and changed my salt, and, I'm going to, start doing some of the things. But I guess my question is, I guess it's iodine. Like, I don't know if I'm officially diagnosed with it just because I had to take the
to be really honest, so you've had this nodule that's present, and that's relevant, and it's good that they've been tracking that. In terms of whether or not you needed to be on thyroid treatment, medicine is always a judgment call, but the guidelines for thyroid treatment during pregnancy don't really mandate being on treatment because of the T4 when the TSH is where yours was. So it was not a harmful thing that was done, but there's no guideline saying you really had a reason to go on treatment or a necessity to be on treatment. And even where you are now, you wouldn't stop that abruptly without working with a doctor, but you're not in a situation that someone typically would be put on or kept on treatment from those findings.
Okay.
And having said all that, you still could be having the benefit of the nodule likely improving by really getting your iodine dialed in and being on a good version of that.
Okay, because that's what I was wondering. Am I at risk for something worse if I don't?
Well, so the nodule, the main risk is thyroid cancer longer term. It sounds like that's clearly not the case right now. You'd want to keep monitoring that. But yeah, lowering and regulating your iodine through the program, that could cut that risk of the nodule growing or progressing.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so I've got a conflict here. There's only 3 hands up, and I said I was going to stop. All right, I've got to clean my plate. Let me just get 3 more questions here. I don't want to leave anyone hanging. I think this is Noreen. Let's hear what you got.
Hi, Dr. Christianson.
Hey there.
I'm a fellow naturopath, so
awesome.
I'm a doctor. So thank you for getting to me today. My thyroid journey kind of happened after my first daughter was born, but then more so when my second daughter was born, where I lost a lot of blood because I had some postpartum bleeding. And so I had pituitary, thyroid, and liver shock. So since that all happened, within like a month of that, I had become hyperthyroid, and they did like a whole iodine uptake scan thing for me and all of that. So now everything is kind of okay. I'm on NP thyroid because of
they
when
had a
nature
recall
thyroid
recently.
wasn't they did, right? But my pharmacist assured me that that was, I don't know, my December's prescription or something. So I'm still on NP thyroid now, but I'm due for another prescription change. So I was wondering if I should go back to nature thyroid because that's what I was taking before they stopped. But my question is, when all that iodine uptake studies and everything was done, they said, oh, you have, because of the thyroid shock, they thought I had Hashimoto's. But every time we do my antibodies, I'm at like a 0.01 or, something really small. It's never like above 1 or 2 or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering why I'm just taking this nature thyroid or NP thyroid and I'm taking 1.5 grains. So it's quite a high dose.
Yeah,
I don't know
you
where
may
to
not
go.
be someone who needs that longer term. You might be a good candidate for your function reversing. Many with Hashimoto's do not have positive antibodies, so that does happen. You can have Hashimoto's and not have the antibodies measurable. But in the interim, NP thyroid is it's not one of the better regulated brands. Nature thyroid or WP thyroid are better regulated and often better absorbed. But yeah, you may be someone that doesn't need longer term treatment. You might be a good candidate for a good thyroid reset.
So how, and what would if I go get my blood work done now, should I get the antibodies tested again or the thyroglobulins? Just make sure, is there a difference in the Hashimoto's, whether I should check that again or not, or should
Honestly,
I just kind of flip?
It wouldn't change what you would do, really.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you think because of that thyroid shock, it just kind of made me become hypothyroid?
You still could have Hashimoto's, that's possible. Many with it don't have positive antibodies, but that could have been the culprit behind that. Yeah.
Okay. And just and I've noticed also that my TSH sometimes can get down to like below like 0.4. So maybe I also need to adjust that dosage of the 1.5 grains.
For sure. Yeah, that might be
and
more
then keep it under like 2, let's say like 0.5 to 2.
That's a general range. Yeah, it's a better general range.
Okay, perfect. And I have one more question. For an 11-year-old daughter, I was on when the other lady was on about her daughter with the nodules. If you have a child that doesn't have any nodules, but has like, overweight, all of that, thyroid TSH is within normal, like around a 2.5 or 2. Seaweed, not a good thing because so many kids are eating that seaweed.
Not a good thing for those purposes. Yeah.
Not okay.
It's
Okay.
getting too much iodine.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much.
Nice to see you, Noreen. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll be the last two. I saw one more add-on, but I will do these last two because I am kind of fading. I want to stay sharp for you guys. So let's see. We've got Kareen. I can't fully see, but let's see. Go ahead and unmute. Oops, I'm sorry. There we go.
Are you there?
Yep, I can barely hear you.
Oh, okay. I had a thyroid storm about 3 years ago after the death of my brother. And then I kind of just took care of myself. I never went to the doctor or anything. And then I had it again last year when my mother passed away. What is the relation, I guess, between stress, I guess, and the thyroid becoming hyper? And I've been hyper for 3 years now. And
You've been hyper, you're on treatment for that, or?
I've never been on treatment for that. No.
Well, you've not had a full diagnosis, unfortunately. But
yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I've self-diagnosed because I have because
Well, the most
fears.
common reason would be Graves' disease or toxic nodule or goiter,
Yeah.
but they're both significant. There are sometimes there's a thing called Hashimotoxicosis. So
Yeah.
early stage Hashimoto's can also cause episodic hyperthyroidism. But the first step is figuring out which of those three categories you're in. Hyperthyroidism intermittently, it's a big deal. And thyroid
Yeah,
storm,
it is.
yeah, it can
Oh,
be
it was,
fatal. It's
oh,
a
it
very
was, it
serious
was.
thing.
Yeah, it was real bad. It was real bad.
You know, it didn't really say this so much on the copy, but the version of the program that includes the doctor's visits, our doctors we really treat all versions of thyroid disease. So we can also make sense out of that and help you properly diagnose and get on appropriate treatment to reverse that. Kind of an odd thing that's not intuitive, but even though Graves' disease is more acutely dangerous than Hashimoto's or hypothyroidism, it's more consistently reversible when someone's on the best versions of treatment. So it's something that often does, 95% of those with Graves can be reversed within about 18 to 24 months. So and reverse meaning not needing any kind of ongoing treatment for it. So yeah. please do connect in some way, but get a diagnosis and get on some proper treatment.
Yeah, well, I self-diagnosed, unfortunately, but yeah,
I don't even do that myself.
I know.
I've got a friend that I go see. I don't even trust my own judgment about myself.
Yeah, and it was more of a because I have trust problems because I was, I was given by a doctor too much iodine, also,
okay.
and that was, I think, kind of the underlying part of it, and so I just don't. So I just don't trust. So I just
too much
myself.
iodine. This was
Yeah.
like the whole Brownstein, ioderol, that sort of a thing, or?
Yeah, it was ioderol. I mean, it was all the way up to, I don't know what that capsule is, 12 and a half. I think it was two of those.
There's a 12,500
Yeah.
microgram and a 25,000 microgram, and then a 50,000 microgram.
Yeah, it was the 12 and a half. Take 2 of those a day.
Oh.
And then everything started tasting like
safe upper limit.
Yeah, everything started tasting like metal, and then one of my eyes started getting all weird, and I said, there's a problem here, and I'm very sensitive, so so that's why I didn't. But
and part of why we're here right now too is that for a long time I've argued against that approach because I've seen so many people harmed from that.
Yeah.
There are cases like yours just like that where someone was pushed into thyroid storm and they didn't survive. I mean, it's tragic.
I know
And
I
so
almost didn't.
I fight that side of it, but then now there's this new data saying that yes, the too much is bad, but also there's this low part that can fix it. So that's why I'm so passionate about sharing this iodine message. It's a critical one that many need to hear.
Yeah, no, when I saw it come across, I was real appreciative of someone putting that out there because I'm so highly sensitive to iodine. I can't eat at restaurants. If I do try to eat any kind of seafood, my throat swells up and it burns, and even certain vegetables. So I don't know if it's the way they're grown.
In the food list, there's a couple of unexpected vegetable sources of a bit more than others. So yeah, those are things that you'll learn about.
Yeah. So I appreciate you putting that out there for a lot of people because it's a problem. Restaurants are a problem. Iodized salt is a problem. I got better on my own, and then I went to my sister-in-law's and started having panic and anxiety. And I said, I think she must be using iodized salt. And I opened up the pantry, and sure enough, and it's that bad.
It's a big deal. I'm so glad you're in better shape now, but I hope you get the rest of the way there. And if we could help out, we'd be glad to do so.
I will. Thank you so much. Thank you for putting that information out there. It's really helpful.
Okay, so Elisa, you're last but not least, as they say, right? And Alyssa, help me out. I want to get it right.
It's Alyssa, but either is fine. Yeah.
Hey, welcome. How you doing?
Good. So can I ask a question about B12, or does it have to be? Okay. So quick question then. I recently found out my B12 is low, and so I'm taking
numbers.
It's at 330.
Could be. That would be a little low. Yeah.
Yeah. So my doctor suggested injections, but I chose to go the sublingual liquid route first to try that out. So assuming that helps my B12 get to a better level, would my thyroid function better once my B12 is at an optimum? No,
you'll feel better, but it won't change how your thyroid's working. Did they explain to you why you were low in B12?
No. She just
That's
did a blood
important.
test and saw my B12 was low and said, here, take injections.
It was cool that they caught it, but we want to know why you're low in that. Are you vegan?
No.
Okay. So if you were vegan and consuming no supplements, that could be a concern. Were you taking any supplements before then that had B12?
No, I only take my Nature-Throid, and that's it.
You know, just in general, the data on how B12 absorbs, that's changed a lot too. Sublingual is fine. Oral methylcobalamin works just fine. We put 5 micrograms in the daily reset pack. No, it's more than that. Shoot, I forgot the exact amount. It's 833% of the RDA is in the reset pack for methylcobalamin. But yeah, oral methylcobalamin, a couple milligrams works just fine for almost all people. Sublingual is fine too, but oral does work when it's methylcobalamin, and that's a preferred form of that. But the real question is why you were low in that. Not being vegan, that should be explained. That thing about thyrogastric syndrome, that's top of the list for possibilities. There's a progression with thyrogastric syndrome to where generally B12 deficiency, you look like you're 20s or 30s or something. I'm just guessing, but the progression of thyrogastric syndrome doesn't usually show B12 deficiency at your age. That's more common in 50s or 60s. So that's the only thing. If you were to have that, it would be more progressed than expected. But there are other factors like intrinsic factor deficiencies, bad cases of H. pylori could have that, but it really does beg a diagnosis because it's happening for some reason. So treating the B12 is easy, and you probably will have some benefits to general mood or mental energy or clarity or things like that from that. That can be a good thing, but you still want to know why, because that reason why would affect you in other ways if it were not uncovered.
Right. And so I just need to ask my doctor to look into more as to why it's happening.
Those who are in the program and working with our doctors, we do that kind of stuff too. We can help troubleshoot those sorts of things and get to those puzzles, because that is one of those 15 things that goes along with thyroid disease. And so we want to know if someone does have those, and then why, why is it happening and what's behind it.
Awesome. Well, I was hoping that B12 would help my TSH because it's still at 2.8.
Now, having said that, doing some of the things like you've already heard may help your TSH, so it could get better. But just in general, the B12 is not thought to be a factor for that.
Cool. All right, that's it. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for being here. Okay, so that was a lot of fun. Thank you guys for coming and hanging out and sticking through the whole time. A big group of you did. That was awesome. Covered a lot of questions. We'll get these recordings out. And yeah, the program, we're kicking that off next week. So a little more space for those that want to come in, and we're just excited about this. It's something that, I don't know, I've never seen a program that's actually personalized before, and it's all new data about thyroid disease being reversible. So it's just an awesome thing. And we've been seeing this happen clinically as well. So if you've had symptoms going on that have been an issue, this could be a time to change that. If you're feeling well and stable, more power to you, but we're here. All right, take great care of yourself, stay safe out there, and yeah, wish you all the best for good health. Bye-bye.